Next, we're going to hear from Colin Morosi with two Z's from ACLU of Ohio, who will give a short issue explanation for both statewide issues 1 and issues 2. All right, we'll start with issue 1, Colin.
Sounds great.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Would you rather be
Should I
here?
stand or
Wherever
sit?
you like. You want
I'll sit. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for putting on this event, as well as the Greater Hilltop Area Commission. And I echo the appreciation of being in a full room. I attend several forums and discussions on these issues, and this is by far one of the most well-attended events, so she'll feel happy and proud about that. But issue 1 is a constitutional amendment that's on the November ballot that would seek to change the way courts issue monetary bail and monetary bail bonds. The language of the ballot initiative inserts public safety as a factor that a judge must consider when assessing or when putting a bail bond on an individual to leave pre-trial, meaning they won't have to stay incarcerated until their arraignment or potentially even after until their trial. I will be upfront. The ACLU of Ohio is officially opposed to issue 1. However, I will try to give as much of a impartial description of that. Essentially, Criminal Rule 46, which was an initiative that was passed by the General Assembly at the behest of the Ohio Supreme Court, made certain that judges must consider public safety when setting non-financial conditions of release, meaning they could assign probation officers for supervisory control over a released individual. They could have text reminders, electronic monitoring, but cash bail, meaning how much money you actually have to pay in order to get out of jail, was only to be used in terms of ensuring the return of that individual for their court date. It was not meant to be used as a way to ensure the individual is incarcerated until that point. This came about and was a contentious issue in a recent Ohio Supreme Court case called DeBose v. McGuffey, which is coming out of Hamilton County, in which a bail level was lowered by the Ohio Supreme Court for somebody who had been charged with murder in Hamilton County. It was a 4-3 decision by the Ohio Supreme Court that said that the trial court and the subsequent appellate court erred by imposing such an excessive bail that currently is prohibited in the Ohio Constitution as well as the United States Constitution. So the proponents of issue 1 quickly drafted House Joint Resolution 2, which would insert considerations of public safety as a requirement for judges when setting monetary bail. That's about as far as I'll go and without us opining on the merits of the issue. But that is essentially the question that is being asked, whether or not judges will be forced to consider public safety when setting not only non-financial conditions of release, but also monetary conditions of release.
And if anyone has a question, you can just raise your hand for this portion.
Yeah, please.
And okay.
How does this constitutional amendment stack up with any federal constitutional existing standards? Is this going to be in conflict or is this going to sail through its past?
So the 8th Amendment of the United States guarantees that no person shall face cruel and unusual punishment as well as excessive fines or bail amounts. Now, what does excessive mean? Supreme Court holdings, United States Supreme Court holdings have said that excessive is determined to be disproportional to the severity of the offense or a disproportionate amount that would essentially make it impossible for that person to secure their release through a monetary bail. That is why, one of the reasons why The ACLU is opposed to issue one. We believe it has significant US constitutional defects, as well as it just being wrong public policy in general.
You mentioned that the intent was to prevent bail from more serious crime. At least that's the impression that. Can you talk a little bit about the language with regard to maybe less serious crimes? Or is there any impact as it relates to less serious crimes?
So I guess let me first of all clarify the intent of this measure of issue one. For the measure to achieve what the proponents of the measure are saying they want it to achieve is that they will essentially be asking judges to set such high bail amounts that it will be impossible for people to pay them and thus stay in jail until they're arraigned.
Yes, so is that relegated to certain level of criminality?
No, there's no, there-
So for a first degree misdemeanor or something, where to be picked up and spent overnight in jail or something like that.
correct.
You follow me?
Yeah, there is no threshold offense that would trigger this public safety consideration.
Correct me if I'm not saying the proponents of the bill, the language would allow everyone across the board, regardless of crime, to be in that situation where.
Potentially, yes. It would be left to the discretion of the judge. But
they would
should
have-
issue one pass and the judge see fit to impose a significant bond, there is no, delineation between offenses. It would be, you could do to an unclassified misdemeanor. Obviously, that's going to be super rare, and we don't think that would happen. But certainly, low-level, non-person felonies, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So I didn't hear what the bail considerations specifically are without this public safety consideration. Specifically for, let's say, an extreme, let's say a serial murderer that's considered that has been captured, that is alleged to have committed these type of crimes, without being able to consider public safety. What considerations are you to consider?
Well, in that scenario, sir, I would encourage the prosecutor and the judge to pursue preventative detention, which is a secondary statute within the Ohio Revised Code that actually allows judges to deny a alleged offender's bail regardless. So that's kind of what is the missing link here, because
That's not
proponents
the
of it,
question. Saying without that, what are the considerations existing right now as it stands without this issue one passing? What considerations to a very violent type of offense? What are on the table that they consider if they're not to consider public safety?
well, other than the preventative detention statute, which is one, there's also electronic monitoring, supervision by, court personnel, whether it be a parole or whether they have to attend a facility and do check-ins. But obviously there is an ability to pose a monetary bail, but that purpose of that monetary bail needs to be to ensure that person's return to court. I would say there is, and I want to just refer to this preventative detention statute, that is explicitly in the revised code for those exact offenders, alleged offenders. Because when the seriousness of the crime is so great, then there is a mechanism for prosecutors and for judges to outright deny the person bail regardless. Because using that scenario, let's just say that offender, alleged offender of a very heinous crime, let's say they had kind of the financial resources of a Jeffrey Epstein. What level of bail would be sufficient to keep that person incarcerated? We would argue that a more appropriate mechanism would be the preventative detention statute, which does require a hearing and which does require a presentation of evidence. However, in a free country where innocent until proven guilty is a standard of our criminal justice system, the ACLU of Ohio believes that there does need to be a measure of due process in order to, deny somebody their liberty pre-conviction. Let's all remember here, this population of individuals we're talking about have not been convicted of a crime. They've been charged, which are two completely different things.
One more question on this issue, and then we'll move to issue two.
So right now, we want to make sure the person shows up for court. We want to make sure the public is safe. And right now, we can do both of those with like house arrest or electronic monitoring or something. Is that correct?
We at the ACLU of Ohio would say, yes, we can.
Okay, so if we have two things we need to do, and we have ways to do those two things, what do we need issue one for?
Well, as I said at the beginning, the ACLU of Ohio is opposed to issue one, so we would argue we do not need issue one.
All right, with that being said, can you now take us, please, Mr. Morosi, on to a briefing on issue two?
Absolutely. So issue two is another measure that was brought forth by the Ohio General Assembly. And it seeks to change who can and cannot, and I would, put that in quotation, it seeks to change who can and cannot vote in local elections. Issue two says that it would say that only US citizens at the age of 18 are eligible to vote. Current law says every US citizen of 18 years of age is eligible to vote. So it's a one-word change, but it's, the General Assembly felt strong enough to put that forward through House Joint Resolution 4. And this was done in a response to the Village of Yellow Springs in 2020, passing a local charter amendment, municipal charter amendment, that would have granted non-citizens the right to vote in those local elections. They did so through their home rule authority, which is another provision of the Ohio Constitution that confers some autonomy to villages and municipalities. That sparked, I guess I wouldn't say it sparked, this happened in 2020. HJR 4 showed up in June of 2022. So that was the catalyst for this. Again, whether or not it is a necessary change, that is something that each voter should, make a determination for himself. But that is essentially what this issue would do, change every US citizen age 18 to only a US citizen of age 18. Now, that does have some ripple effects down the line. When you look at Ohio's voter registration window, that same section of the Ohio Constitution, says that every 18-year-old US citizen who's been registered to vote for 30 days may cast a ballot. By changing this to only, that would solidify that 30-day window. So say the General Assembly couldn't come back in their next session and change it to, instead of a 30-day registration window, which is the maximum allowable under federal law, they could change it to what other states have, like 20, 21, 15. But this small word change would lock in that 30-day window for voter registration deadlines in the state. That's just one, and that's just a side ripple effect of what this language change could do.
And that is only for local elections.
Yes, you already have to be a US citizen, and it's explicitly said in federal law to vote in federal elections. The Ohio Revised Code explicitly states that you must be a US citizen to vote in statewide elections. And though this amendment would propose to, prohibit non-citizens from voting in local elections, I think a very strong argument could be made that that is already the law of the land through both state and federal law, and how we administer our elections in the state. Yes. Mr. Holbrook, I'm sorry.
Judge, does this preclude 17-year-olds from voting in primaries?
Well, there's never been a clear answer to that. Proponents say no. Opponents say yes. I believe when you say only, that's restrictive. So I would say yes, this would prohibit 17-year-olds from voting in primary election if they were to turn 18 by the general election,
Which is the existing law.
which is the existing law, correct? Yes.
Does the precise language in the amendment itself, would that hamper other kinds of home rule or just this home rule?
Just this scenario.
But what is that precedent
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. So
for that?
and yes, it would further weaken home rule in the state. And that would merely continue a trend that has really been the norm for the past, several decades in Ohio, is kind of a chipping away of home rule authority and autonomy. But yes.
Are there any municipalities that you're aware of in Ohio or elsewhere that do allow non-citizens to vote in school board, city council, things that do, they are directly paying taxes into and otherwise is affected by?
The only municipalities I know of that allow non-citizens to vote are New York City and San Francisco.
All right, with there being no additional questions, let's give a round of applause to Mr. Morosi. I'd like to thank you for all your cheers. Thank you. Yes. And that was with 2Z, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. So in closing, I'd like to close the event by thanking all of the candidates for, again, coming tonight in a spirit of community and civility. I think that in and of itself is worthy of a round of applause. And again, thank you, candidates, for your participation and for driving the democratic process. This recording will be viewable on the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus's Facebook page. Most of it, I think there might have been a hiccup that cuts out some, and we urge all of you to make a voting plan now. We heard tonight from several candidates for judge that we should even go ahead and make a judicial voting plan now. Early voting started on October 12th, and election day is November 8th. Please check the voter guide right over here, or you could go to vote411.org for a full list of candidates and their stance on so many issues. And I want to thank all of you, the citizenry of our community, for coming out and driving the democratic process forward. And with that, I say good evening. Thank you.